And hello, everyone. Welcome back to Project 180, the project management podcast, where we talk with managers, leaders, project managers from all sorts of industries to see the common threads through what it is that we do. Today, we've got Rasheeda Qureshi from Toronto. Morning.
Morning.
And how are you doing today?
Well, thank you.
Excellent. I'm glad. And it's really nice to see you and nice to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Nice.
Now, Rasheeda, you've got a pretty interesting gig currently. I'm wondering if you could just kind of describe what you do now and in terms of consulting with not-for-profits and what is fractional fundraising. I'm curious about that too.
Right. So yes, I've been a consultant for a couple of years now, and fractional fundraiser specifically for the past year. Fractional. Okay. So let me start with fractional fundraising because it's top of mind, and then I can answer any other questions around that. Fractional fundraising, you've heard of fractional executives, right? So they're executives who will be parachuted into organizations to help them on an interim basis for a certain period of time. So a fractional fundraiser is similar. Basically, somebody who is a strategic leadership person, so not a CMO or a CFO, but a fractional fundraiser, an FFO, who will come into an organization for a finite period. And the advantage to small not-for-profits is that they get a strategic leadership level fundraiser that they can afford because it's on a fractional basis. So I like to work with small but mighty not-for-profits who are doing amazing work, but quite often their budgets can't stretch to afford like a senior level fundraiser. So there's a few of us in Toronto and across Canada and in the US. And some of us are even sort of working out of the UK and Africa. But we do just that. We sort of empower small and mighty not-for-profits to raise more money so that they can do more great work. So I've been doing that for about a year now.
It's a really unique model. In terms of you're almost kind of walking in, lending your leadership and your knowledge and all those capabilities, but in a controlled way. So you're not moving in and taking over an organization or anything, but you are kind of taking the slice and assisting with the overall health of the organization.
You're right. I mean, I think the way that it is worked, and I like to say that I like to right size whatever we do to the organization because it's so important, because you can't go into an organization and treat it like, you'll be there in perpetuity, right? Quite often they're not going to be able to afford somebody in future years too. So it's really incumbent upon us as fractional fundraisers to put into place foundational work that is replicable and manageable by whoever's going to do it subsequently. So yeah, I think it's a great model, and so many of us feel passionate about the work that we're doing here in these small not-for-profits from that perspective.
That's amazing, and it's interesting because this is very much it's leadership, it's management, it's relationships a lot. I assuming that you're building there, but you started your career as a project. I'll put my air quotes on, project manager. Some years ago. Can you tell us a bit about how you started in that role and maybe how your skills evolved to the point where you're now leading and helping on these larger scale issues?
You're so kind to put it in air quotes.
Project management.
But it's quite a few years ago. So I was in for-profit for like yonks, what mom used to call yonks. So we emigrated to Canada like in the late 90s. And we landed in downtown Toronto, and we had a babe in arms, and it was like chaos, and we were like figuring things out. And I walk around the corner, and there are people hiring in the call center. And so I was in the call center doing my part-time gig, and then a role goes up for project manager. And I'm like, let me just throw my hat in the ring. And it was a really informal interview. So yeah, at the end of the day, I talked to the HR manager, and the next day I'm like, right, you start on Monday. And I don't know anything about being a project manager, but hey, the good news was that it turns out that I am hardwired because some people are, some people aren't. I'm hardwired to follow projects from their gestation through to their how we're going to do this, creating the process, following them through to the different markers on when we need to deliver deliverables and holding people accountable to them, and then your final project, and doing a debrief and what worked and what didn't. So enjoyed that, but we talked about this before, Kevin. It's sometimes thankless task holding people accountable to different things.
Sometimes,
Yes,
sometimes it
exactly.
is. Yeah.
So did that for a while, and then morphed into different areas in my corporate job, into account management, like you said, relationship building, which I thoroughly enjoyed because I was account managing and business development for a while. And then I want to say it was 2012 or so when I was leading a Canadian P&L for the Canadian business unit, and responsible for P&L for what was effectively a startup. And yeah, busy job, enjoyed it because of the people, but then became less and less enjoyable because I was on the hamster wheel. So many of us are on the hamster wheel, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So when they're doing a global organizational restructure and they offer a package, I'm like, yes, thank you very much. And then took a long break and went to see my parents. I'm from Pakistan originally, so I went to see my parents for 6 months. No, not 6 months. I should be so lucky, for 6 weeks, and clear out the
Clear
stuff.
the cobwebs a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then come back and I'm like, right, what am I going to do with myself? I got a bunch of skills. But then, we talked about this before as well. Not knowing what you don't want to do is not a plan. So you need to figure out what you do want to do. And this is what it takes a while sometimes to sort that stuff out.
Yeah.
And so recognizing and understanding what you're good at is helpful, and then building the plan around that. It's sometimes hard to do, though, is what I think I recognize now. A lot of people have trouble identifying what they're good at, and not only what they're good at for themselves, but what other people will find of value,
Yeah.
what organizations will find of value that they're good at. So figuring that stuff out. But anyway, the penny dropped in late spring 2013. I'm like, I would like to work for charities and with charities and do all that good work. And yeah, I think I got skills, and started the networking and so on. That sort of gets you there. So
Yeah.
bottom line, when a whole host of like 40 networking interviews, funnest summer of my existence, where I'm like literally going and having coffees with amazing people, like leaders of not-for-profits who are like just cold call in the morning at 8:30 when nobody else is in the office but the CEO is. And you're like, hi, my name is Rasheeda Qureshi. My last gig was VP of such and such, and I would like to work in not-for-profit. And your LinkedIn profile has some really cool expertise. Would you be willing to share some advice with me? And you know what? The number of people who said yes was really surprising.
That's amazing.
It was really, really fun. And I sent them, if I left them a voice message, I sent them a snail mail letter. You know how rare snail mail letter is these days? I like getting snail mail myself, and I think other people do as well. And it sort of showed up on their desks the next day, and it's harder to ignore snail mail than email, is what I find.
Interesting. It could just kind of so easily just go boom into the recycling bin. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's unique, and it's a unique way to do things these days, which is fantastic.
If you think about it, the picking up of a piece of paper and putting it into the putting it into the recycling bin is a conscious act of choice, versus ignoring an email that just gets deeper and deeper because you've just ignored it. You actually haven't taken any action.
That's true.
There's that. So,
look at you. Genius.
Well, I can't claim any of these are all good ideas I learned along the way that people shared with me. And this is why we do this, right, Kevin? Because people share ideas that work for them. And what I have learned also is to pay it forward. So I regularly, when people reach out for help, I will always say yes.
Same.
And I really love having coffees with people in person. And I even love more having networking meetings with people. Again, cannot claim this idea for myself. I have learned it from other people, but I love that. Now, if it's a blizzard outside, which we get in Toronto, I will say no networking today. Thanks. Let's just go have a coffee. But yeah, that's me.
Well, a couple interesting things maybe you can drill in there, because I like how you described yourself being hardwired for managing projects and that ergo, teams and larger things, right?
Sure.
Have you had, or that's a yes or no question. Never ask yes or no questions. It's another thing I've learned.
That's okay.
What kind of formal training have you done maybe over the years, or have you done certifications, that kind of thing? Or have you really just been figuring it out and you just have that natural capacity for it?
Well, I say I have a natural capacity for it, but others will be the judge of that, I think.
So far so good. I think your track record's pretty solid. So
thank you. I appreciate you saying that. So my husband's a PMP.
Okay.
He's the officially certified PMP.
Right.
And I've in the long time ago, I helped him with flashcards and all that stuff to do with writing the exam. I considered it, and I never actually went and did it because I segued pretty early on in my career from official project manager to an account manager and relationship manager, and from thence into what is fundraising. But fundraising is all about relationships, and it's also about managing projects. Although nobody tells you this, it's also about managing projects and reining in processes and making things doable.
Yeah.
It helps to be a people person and a process person, is what I find.
Well, and I can tell you're definitely a very outgoing individual. Would you consider yourself outgoing?
I do. I'm a solid extrovert by all of the tests.
I was going to guess that.
Yeah, I know. It's not hard. It's not hard to guess. I'll be honest. I mean, I would have said that was solid. It's been solid most of my adult life. I think, although as I get older, I find I need more recharge time and I value more recharge time, which is alone time to myself. But then, and I work from home now, Kevin, right? So I'm a fractional fundraiser and I consult with charities everywhere. I can work with anybody, anywhere. I do like seeing in person, so I'll make trips to see them.
Yeah.
But all the work we do is possible from a distance, within reason. I mean, a donor meeting is best in person. A donor event is best attended in person, things like that. But those are the exception, not the norm. So yeah, no, I would say that that is certainly true for me.
Yeah. You're obviously very extroverted, outgoing. You like the relationship building. You like the people, management, the relationship management. What kind of challenges? I'm trying to think of a scenario that might happen. You're working with an organization, or maybe it's past life in one of your teams. Managing relationships that are maybe at odds. Like Bob over here wants this from a project and somebody else over here wants something else. Like, how do you use those kind of natural skills you have to kind of engage everybody and come to some kind of resolution?
Trying to think of a situation where that might have been true. I think one of the things I have found is that I also enjoy facilitation. So, and the reason I say that is because I did that when I was project manager, yonks ago, like Mom used to say. But
I'm going to start saying that, by the way, yonks ago. I love that.
It's not yonks ago, it's just yonks. So
okay.
Yonks ago is my iteration of it. But anyway, I think for me, it's less about and what I'm better at. I will say this: I'm better at just if there's a project that we had a kickoff call for, and I'm thinking particularly about a project that got too many years ago to count, but because I'm project manager, I'm facilitating because it was a tech startup. I'm facilitating a programmer and a project manager because this is when I was an account manager, and potentially the client. And then there's other layers of people invested in the organization. We're all in a virtual room on a call. Kevin, the call went for 3 hours. the call went for friggin' 3 hours
Oh,
because it was an
that's
international project and there was
right.
a lot of stake. I did not anticipate it would take 3 hours. And when it ended, I was like, okay, stepping away now, stepping away. I'm going to go for a walk now. I need to clear my head.
Yeah.
But so the reason why I went that long is because everybody needed to have a say.
Mhm.
And I think that is fine. It doesn't speak necessarily terribly well for my time management skills, but especially for something that is on the calendar for an hour.
Right.
But I think it was necessary in this case because as part of the facilitation, I was going around the room and like, okay, what do you have to add to this, and how can we, and what does this mean for the timeline? What does this mean for the outcome?
Yeah.
And John, are you okay with that? And Jill, you mentioned something that might interfere with that. There's an interdependency. What is the co-interdependency? Let's document this. I can do minutes afterwards, but please let's just get this all clear and on the table now. That resulted in, the project going reasonably well, but I, I was early in my career and I had never received positive affirmation in the way that this arrived on my desktop. And my manager walked in. I was fairly junior at the time, and he's like, put an email down on my table, and it was like 2 lines. Sorry, I'm tooting my own horn here, but it felt so good at the time.
Please go for it.
Um, just who is Rasheeda Qureshi anyway? Where did you find her? She's awesome. And I'm like,
I love it. That's
and
fantastic.
I was like, I looked up, it was Nelson. Looked up at Nelson, I was like, and he was like, she never says things like this. Well done. So I was like, that kind of positive affirmation can go miles
Mhm.
to building a young person's confidence, a young person who's trying really hard.
Mhm.
And I'm recognizing, Kevin, I'm not necessarily answering your question, but I think I'm answering your question in a sideways way, which says that bringing the people together and getting agreement isn't always easy,
Yep.
but it's always worth it.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the story because
Mm,
not to toot my horn as well, but we've all had similar meetings that just kind of
sure.
went long, or like,
Yes.
okay, well, here's our goals for this meeting, everybody. We've got this nice, neat agenda, and boom, right? You realize that you've misread the room maybe previously, and
Yeah.
now people need this space and this opportunity to get out whatever they need to get out. It's half like project therapy, right? It's trying to just get everybody's feelings out on the table as well. And yeah, I found that most of the job of a project manager or scrum master or whatever you might be, agile practitioner, all these labels that are basically the same thing.
The labels.
Um, it's all about giving people the opportunity to share what they feel they need to, right? And making sure they do it, because some people are very extroverted like
Yeah.
yourself, and they will maybe just, yeah, I'm going to say what I need to say. But you also have to have that facilitation side, which is what you were saying before, of
100%.
maybe pulling out the folks who are a little quieter and maybe more nervous or shy or don't
Yeah.
feel comfortable sharing that, right? One of the things that I've started doing over the last few years is, especially when virtual environment, it's sometimes that makes it even more difficult to get the feel of the room necessarily, is polling. Like, we do little surveys and things like that too.
Oh, yes.
So if maybe we had the 2 hour 3 hour meeting, send out 5 questions in a Google form or something like that to make sure that everybody had that opportunity to percolate on things or to share something they didn't maybe get the opportunity to do so.
100%. I mean, you're right. I mean, and I recognize that it goes back to your question about extroverted, introvert, and regardless of how you're wired, everybody is going to need to have their day, and sometimes you do need to um, stop and pause and say, okay, who in this room has not yet spoken up because they're still here, and so do they have something to say? And recognizing that you need to give everybody, to your point, the opportunity to have their say, because otherwise they'd be like, I couldn't get a word in edgeways. And I'm recognizing now that there are people who feel that way, because not everybody's just going to jump in with an opinion because that's the way they're
Yeah.
wired. I'm just going to say, I'm just going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But an introvert isn't necessarily, they're going to be like, well, where can I actually get my word in edgeways, right?
Yeah.
So it's important. I mean, it's important to team, sense of belonging, but it's also important to project, understanding, and implementation. From all those perspectives. I mean, there's definitely a social side to all of this, isn't there? There's a very definitive social side that can get missed in the science of things.
Absolutely. And I know I am naturally very introverted. I have kind of learned the skills of extroversion, so to speak. I can do that when necessary. But for many years, I was that quiet one in those meetings.
Yes.
It was kind of passed over, right? Because I wasn't jumping in or getting, emotionally involved in the conversation. So I've had to learn that too. So I guess living on that side of the line as a facilitator and project manager now, I can kind of recognize those people. It's like, I know you got something to say. I know you do, and I'm going to wait for it, or I'm going to just call on you individually and make you share whatever it is you're thinking. But yeah, it's important to make sure, and those long form conversations that can kind of get out of control sometimes. There's still a lot of value there.
Absolutely.
And if you're charging by the hour, all the better too, right?
This is true. I don't charge by the hour. We have a fractional fundraisers
No.
But you know what? Fractional fundraisers do have a fairly unique business model. So we operate on a finite period of time, but we invoice monthly based upon an agreed upon scope of work, which is simple. It's not rocket science, people, but it is based in sort of a knowledge and understanding of what a particular client might need, and the client is usually, in our case, a small not-for-profit.
Can we talk about success and metrics? These kinds of things, because obviously those are a huge part of any project. You have to set a goal, you have to set success criteria, and then try and achieve those and adapt them as necessary as you move forward. Right? If you find some things, nope, that's never going to happen, let's readjust. And now our goal is here. In your current business model as a fractional fundraiser, or even in previous roles, like, how do you work with the client to determine what that success is for a particular project?
It's the critical piece of everything that we do now as fractional fundraisers. What I do is, so I'm talking to a client. It'll start with a discovery call. So we're talking because they need to raise money. Here's one thing that is true for most charities. They all need to raise more money, right? Just because the money ain't flowing in from other sources. So we have to figure out how we're going to make that happen. Sometimes they're just the world's best kept secret, and the world needs to hear about them. It always starts with a discovery call. So, and I ask key questions. I ask things like, what are your aspirations 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Because let's face it, most of them go year to year to year. They don't necessarily know if their doors are going to be open for longer. And then what would your goals be? And then what do you currently have in place that you would like to see true in 5 years' time? How would you like to see it morph? Once we agree to work together, which is a process, I get it, then it'll always be about, let's set goals in the context of what I'm doing now is it's a fundraising plan. A fundraising plan is a set of objectives and / goals with activities built on to support those goals to ensure their completion. So several of the organizations one I have that I worked for in the past, and one that I work with now, does OKRs, objectives and key results, which I'm super familiar with and totally works with my style of working. So you set your objectives, you build on key results, and there's accountability in the system because everybody, and transparency, because everybody knows what their objectives are and what their key results are going to be that feed into that, but also they can see what everybody else's are, and everybody knows what the interdependencies are. But the way I work is we create the fundraising plan, we create the goals and objectives based upon what they want to achieve, and we always have an action plan to support it. And the action plan includes, yes, we've talked about the strategy, which builds on their mission and vision, but that strategy always has to be directed by activities that are rooted in tactics, that, who's doing what and when, and holding ourselves accountable to specific items that we're going to move forward. And then by the spring, we've achieved XYZ, and by the fall, we've achieved, ABC kind of thing. It sounds like it's sometimes easier said than done. I'll say this. You can create a plan, and well, you know what they say about the best laid plans, right?
Of course.
So you have to ensure that the organization is bought in. But there's also the whole project management piece in terms of, so for example, I'll give you a model client right now who's really, I'm loving working with them, right? So I started with them mid-January. We did an onboarding process, so learning about each other a lot more deep into, financial statements and so on. Then you spent a few weeks talking about aspirations and creating a framework, and then stakeholder conversations. So in our case, because we're working with charities, donors, volunteers, clients, right? Talking to folks, getting their feedback in various mediums. Online service, in-person Zoom interviews, in-person meetings, staff SWOT. It was so much fun doing that SWOT. I love doing that kind of in-person facilitation. All of that makes it, you bring it all together, and that all fed into our fundraising plan, which is, here's the background, here's historical revenue analysis, here are our objectives that are informed by stakeholder reviews, stakeholder input, perspectives, and based upon our objectives, here are the things that are achievable given our current resources, given that Rasheeda is going to be on board this year with some foundational work, and she's going to need support from staff because so much stuff lives in other staff's head. But the idea is to create the foundation, and then Rasheeda is going to roll up her sleeves and literally dive in and do this work for you, kind of thing, for this first year. And I'm just like, where are we in the process? We are in the process where the fundraising plan is final as far as our the ED and myself and a keyboard member is concerned. And now it's going to go to the board for presentation and buy-in. And then we're just going to go and roll it out and involve everybody along the way. So that's kind of like how the process is going to work. I'm so deep into the story, Kevin, I can't remember your question. So you'll have to
That's okay. Can I jump something there? Because what you're describing, I mean, as a card carrying PMP, project manager guy, what you're describing is absolute textbook, right? It's perfect scenario, and this because you've figured out your process, but so many organizations, and I'm not going to pick on anybody in particular, but we've all been there, or worked with them, or worked at them. That there's not maybe the focus, or they're still a little fuzzy in terms of what that organizational focus is. I've seen that too, because I mean, you're seeking funding, right? So if there's funding over here, maybe we're more about this now because there's some available funding, and that changes your focus a little bit, right?
Yes.
But what you're talking about is really like laser focus on a specific goal for a specific purpose. And I'm assuming, I know what they say about people who assume, but I'm assuming here that this really can help the whole team, the whole company, organization, not-for-profit, focus their efforts across the board. It's not just a fundraising project. This is like an overall kind of, this is how we're doing our business.
This is how we work. Yeah, this is how we work. I think I'm fortunate in this one. So I think you're right. I think it'll help inform other areas of their work. Not for me to say they will gauge this for themselves.
Of course.
It is a fundraising process we're engaged in, but hopefully they will look at it and reflect on it in hindsight, and they'll be like, oh, that actually made sense. The way that we worked with Rasheeda was maybe the way we could consider working on for this capital project for our new site next year. I don't know. I mean, but what it involves is, setting your goals after consultation with stakeholders, after understanding the landscape, and creating the action plan that is right sized to the organization and current capacity and resources, and keeping in mind future capacity and resources, because it is all about that. You have to have sustainability built into your plan, because otherwise, what's the point? You're then just living year to year, you know?
Yeah. It's I just speaking so matter of factly, but I think it's what a lot of people miss, and not through any fault of their own. It's because your head is down, and you're working on, and a lot of not-for-profits and charities are like perpetual crisis mode, or
Indeed.
perpetual trying to
Yes.
keep things together mode.
Yes.
Right? So it's hard to raise your head up and build that longer term plan. But what you're giving them is that opportunity to be able to not only manage this project, but you're setting expectations, you're helping them model a behavior as well in terms of how the organization functions.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I think hopefully they'll learn something. But I will say this: they're also, for a small organization, they have a pretty incredible leader.
Yep.
This is why leadership matters. They're
Yeah.
a pretty incredible leader who has, in the 7 years she's been with them, really brought their capacity up to a point where, you know, she was the only staff member 7 years ago.
Okay.
And now she has a team of 6. And now from one site in a church basement, they now have 3 sites. None of them is in a church basement.
Amazing.
And so yeah, so it's, and they, you know, they started volunteer led like more than 28, 30 years ago. And now they are a certified charity that is recognized leaders in the community, that other organizations rely on them. So yes, they're small. Yes, they're always struggling, but they've come a long way, baby. And I like working with organizations that got it figured out, because
That's great.
hey, the ability to grow for such organizations is great.
Well, there's that classic model, and I forget what it's called right now. I know it's got a name, but forming, storming, norming, performing.
Yeah.
Right? That whole spectrum of maturity, of organizational maturity. And what you're talking about, people have figured out that step, because it's very hard to get from storming to norming, and it's very hard to get to performing. So there's all these levels, and you're talking about folks who have really kind of figured that out, which is amazing. Let me ask you maybe one more question, Rasheeda.
Sure.
And I know there's another person on the line too, so I want to remind our audience member, Katie, if you've got something you'd like to throw in, please jump in anytime. But I kind of always think that every interaction you have in your professional, day is got some element of project management to it, right? It's stakeholder management, it's relationship management, it's, you're talking about budget. It's all those elements are there.
Yeah.
What have you I'm curious if you've got some, great tips or something, but something you've learned along the way that's really helped you focus and make your own process, your own work more efficient when you're handling these kind of projects or relationships?
There's a lot of little things, but like if I was to pick one, and I hesitate to default to a cliche, but
Sure.
I will say this. Be yourself, because everybody else is taken. So what do I mean? It's easier said than done to be yourself, especially when you feel like there's bits of you that are not fit for public viewing. And I think that's true for everybody, really.
It's that imposter syndrome, right?
It's the imposter syndrome, like, who am I to be here, and who am I to claim that I'm this expert consultant who knows anything there is to know about fundraising, and I can help you raise more money. Yes, I can. Well, yes, I can, because hey, I'm now at a point where the proof is in the pudding. God, I'm full of cliches today. The proof is in my track record, right, of having been able to do this for organizations, both where I've been a full-time employee, but also where now I'm fortunate to be in the position, and it doesn't escape me that I'm fortunate to be in the position to be well supported by a partner who was very well, he was just really supportive when I was like, hey, I don't want to do this full-time gig anymore. I got family that I need to travel halfway across the world for. I can't just drop a 24/7 job and go. So you know what? Can you give me some time while I figure out this consultant piece? Because it takes time to figure out the transition to moving from an in-house role that I had worked in-house for more than 20 years in Canada, and to working for myself, which, by the way, I love. And nobody, you couldn't have told me like 5 years ago that I would have loved working for myself at home for organizations of all kinds, right? So it's just be yourself. Everybody's always already taken. It's sort of just speaking to authenticity. It's speaking to the hardest act there is to act like somebody else, because you can never be consistent.
Yeah.
Part of be yourself is learning what you're good at, and sort of tying back to the earlier part of our conversation, and understanding what is of value to organizations that you're good at. Because it's not only about, oh, I'm such a great baker. Well, if nobody cares what you bake, then it doesn't matter, does it? Well, you know, but if I can say that, you know, I'm good at facilitating a contentious conversation and driving consensus and creating process and creating value for organizations. And, you know, I like doing it. I like bringing different opinions and making sure everybody feels heard. But then what are we doing here? We're not just here to sing kumbaya. We're also here to achieve a goal, right? What's our goal, people? Is everybody aligned with this goal? Does anybody have any dissenting opinions? Because please speak now, right? Because this is the time when we want to just get it all together, because we're setting goals now. To your point, storming, norming, and forming. Is that right?
Forming, storming, norming, performing.
Okay, got it. I will remember that, because I think that's going to be quite important to my line of work. I have heard it before, but I hadn't retained it. So it is important, I think, to sort of recognize that from a project management perspective, that those things matter. You know, and it's okay to be an introvert. It's okay to not want to make a noise in an in every conversation. It's totally okay. It's just me that wants to make a noise in every conversation. That's just okay. That's me. I'm just different, right?
Authentic self, right? Authentic self.
Authentic self. But then, you know, being an introvert doesn't mean that you never have a point of view. Everybody has a point of view, but it's like, how do you present your point of view in a way that it is heard? That's the key, right? I'm sorry, I think I'm talking in generalities, but I do want to provide some specificity to folks. And I think the specificity is, you know, if at any point, you know, you're unsure about, you know, things that I do, I'm going to make a list of them that I'm good at, that I feel confident when I'm doing. Then I would say talk to people, like, you know, people that you trust. Talk to people like, these are the things that I think I'm good at. And, you know, I feel like I don't love the job I'm doing. What else could I be doing? Because, Kevin, that's what I did. I did it when I transitioned from corporate to not-for-profit. I was like, I did make that list. I did talk to people, and people came back with themes. Well, they came back with individual perspectives, but individual perspectives became themes of things that, if more than 3 people are saying a certain thing, well, you should sit up and pay attention. If you're good at relationship management, Rasheeda, then yes, it made sense that you were in account management and business development. But if you're transitioning to not-for-profit, then those are a good skill set to be a fundraiser. So that's how it helped me, because I was transitioning into not-for-profit, but I could have transitioned to a different area. I could have transitioned into program management, or I don't know, something else. But enough people said fundraising would probably be the easiest and most effective transition for you, because that's who you are.
Well, Rasheeda, that's amazing. It was maybe this perfect way to wrap it up. I want to say thank you so much for your time today. It's a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you. I appreciate the time to chat.